Hello and welcome to my YuGiOh channel. In today's video we're going to be looking at 4 pendulum decks that you should fear. That's right, within YuGiOh Arc 5 we're obviously going to get the introduction of brand new pendulum monsters, and of course there are certain archetypes that you need to be aware of and at least know how to counter, because when they actually get into the game they are going to be degenerate almost to the same extent they were when they were first introduced within the original Arc 5 era. Remember things such as Cleese, the Apocryphal Towers? Those are big news and potentially could be very devastating for this game. Now, since I've started with the Clee archetype, I might as well continue. These are also referred to as the Clee Fort archetype. They're made up of Earth attribute machine type monsters, which came about from the set called the New Challengers. I think this was the second main booster box straight after the Duelist Alliance. Therefore, this was really our first taste of a new pendulum deck and what they could potentially do in the future. When people saw it, they were very scared of what it could do before eventually they found ways of countering it. They are intended to take full benefit of the pendulum summoning mechanic. This is shown within the crystal designs, which represent pendulum scales. One is red and the other is blue. Their playing style relies on pendulum summoning them to use them for tribute summons, with effects that activate when they have been tribute summoned. They all possess the pendulum restriction effect, which stops monsters outside of their own archetype from being pendulum summoned. The monster effects let them be normal summoned without tribute by making themselves a level 4 and their original attack become 1800. Any monster with a level or rank equal to or lower than a Clee cannot use their effects against it. Therefore, if they summoned through tributing, they could keep their levels, making them more difficult to target with monster effects. The idea of the deck is to use Cleefort Scout to continually pay 800 life points to search for more of your Cleefort cards. Eventually, once you get enough monsters on your field, you can go into your boss monsters. These are either Apocryphal Towers, which is a level 10 that is unaffected by spell or trap cards, as well as any monsters with a level or rank lower than 11. It cuts special summon monsters' attack and defense by 500, and each turn you can force your opponent to send a monster from their hand or their side of the field to the graveyard, meaning the longer it takes you to get rid of this card, the less likely you are to be able to beat over it. Now, if you were to think the alternative boss monster is much better, then think again. Apocryphal Skybase has pretty much the same resistances as Towers, but it is one level lower, meaning monsters that are now leveled or ranked at 10 or above can use their effects on that card. But it lets you steal an opponent's monster per turn, which can then be used as a tribute, making it difficult to recover from. I might be underselling this deck, as I won't be covering the full effects of these cards, but let's just say this. You had better hope this is not featured as a new deck, otherwise this is likely to dominate the competitive scene until it gets banned. I will be in future videos actually doing a full breakdown of these decks and what the archetype actually does, but this is just an overview so you understand what you're getting into with the new sets. And how do you exactly counter these? Since the Clees are reliant on Scout, so many of their cards which can destroy spell and trap cards are useful. Think of things such as Mystical Space Typhoon. Cosmic Cyclone is actually better because it banishes those cards. Fairy Wind is another example. Whilst the 2 boss monsters are very powerful, they can still be countered by continuous effects. For example, Destiny Hero Plasma. It can negate their monster effects and also equip them to it. I believe we are yet to receive Crimson Blader, but if we can get that, then its effect when it destroys a monster means that the opponent cannot normal or special summon level 5 or higher monsters for the duration of their next turn. If you can perpetually do this, you can keep them off their monsters, preventing them from establishing a board, and therefore stopping them from really doing anything. A dedicated Clee player is going to play purely Clee Fort monsters. They're not going to splash all manner of random things, especially when they don't likely synergize together. The next step we're covering is pure performapals. This might seem like an off suggestion, considering some of these are the first forms of support that Yuya Sakaki has, and by definition at the weakest side of the power creep. But the issues of the performapals being as powerful as they have been is that they synergize with each other very effectively. If they keep to the original format of pendulum monsters, which can be summoned from the extra deck with no consequences, many of them have strange effects which can work oddly against certain decks. For example, some of them can reduce attack stats, change battle modes, special summon other cards, search for other cards, enable fusion summoning, adjust levels, and many other examples levels of card effects you might not be able to replicate within other decks. It is less that these cards you need to fear of, and rather the cards which can be brought out because of these cards. For example, Runeye's Pendulum Dragon is a fusion of an Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon and a Spellcaster type monster, where it can attack multiple monsters within the turn. And since this is just the initial example, you can only imagine once we see cards such as Nirvana High Paladin. This was the first example of a synchro pendulum monster, and it was used as the ultimate counter towards Jack Atlas's deck, where he got all of these brand new Red Dragon Archfiend incarnations. It took this Nirvana High Paladin to be able to counter that deck, which in and of itself was incredibly powerful within the storyline. At least when they were in the synchro dimension it was. This as being the main character's deck just demonstrates how if Konami fails to control the performapals, they are likely to get out of hand. And how exactly are you intending to counter these? Performapals can be very random and therefore are reliant on searching for particular cards. If you can disassemble the deck with cards which banish or prevent themselves from being recovered, this is a clear way of countering that deck. The third archetype we're covering is Yosenju. This again is a strange example of a set of cards which really didn't make much of an impact on the anime. It was used by a character known as Silvio Sawatari, who pretty much every time we saw him changed his deck. I believe at one point he was using this, and again at another he started using Monarchs. This deck contains wind attributes. They like to swarm the field through a combination of normal summons and are supported by their pendulum monsters. They appear like spirits which return themselves to the hand at the end of the turn. The purpose of the cards are to keep field control by removing monsters from the field by the effects of things such as Dieback, Karma 1, Whirlwind, and Misak, while searching for their key cards to maintain the game state by cards such as Karma 3, Yosenju Training Grounds, and Oyan. Dieback is considered the boss monster for the deck and has the ability on summon to return cards on the field to the hand. Now, how would you counter these? Yosenjus often leave themselves with empty fields, which means if you have strong monsters, they can direct attack, and that can be game ending. Degenerate Circuit is an exact counter for these, as when they are returned to the hand, they get banished. And the other issue, of course, of that card is you do need to keep it on the field by paying 500 life points, so it's not something you can reliably count on. You do need to have alternative backup strategies. With Karma 1, 2, and 3, since you will have multiple copies of them, Chain Destruction also works to sever their connection, because those banish other copies of those cards, whether that's in the hand and or in the deck, so you're preventing them from actually recovering those cards. Skill Drain can also be used to prevent them from returning to the hand, meaning they have no escape once they're on the field. That's it. You can go over them and stop them from being summoned again, and making them susceptible to being destroyed rather than having to be returned back to the hand. And the final archetype, the Igknights. These are a series of fire attribute warrior type monsters which specialize in self-destruction effects, enabling you to search into other Igknight monsters. This will help to deck thin, but it also places those Igknight cards into the extra deck zone. If you were to focus on Master Rule 3, which lets pendulums be special summoned from the extra deck with no restrictions, it means every turn you can reoccur them. This meant that likely if your opponent will likely run out of cards before you can permanently destroy them. And as for how you can counter these, they're very difficult to counter, considering that if this is going to come out as a full deck, you would need to find a way to banish those cards or send them to the graveyard or return them to the deck, so as you can stop them from being able to recur and to use their own effects. Overall, I think of the most devastating cards, I would say the archetype that is the Igknigth is the most devastating. It's the one you need to watch out for. The other three I don't think are so aggressive. I don't think they're such at a power level where you need to be so concerned, but I would still advise not sleeping on any of those cards, and if you see any of those decks, at least do yourself the favour and run several counter cards for them. What do you guys think are going to be the most threatening pendulum monsters to be introduced into the game? Whatever you think, I'm interested to hear. Put those in the comments down below, like the video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe for more daily Yu-Gi-Oh content.